This week is an exciting week for me because my new 6-foot reef tank has arrived. It's a Sear Reefer 850S, and today I'm going to tell you a bit about it, show you the progress I've made so far, and of course I'll address the controversy that seems to surround these tanks. Now the first thing I need to say is that this tank and all of the Red Sea equipment was given to me for free by Red Sea. No money changed hands, and I'm not restricted in what I can or can't say about the tank or anything else, and Red Sea don't get to see any of the videos I make before you do, nor do they have any input into the content I make. The tank then is 180 centimeters long, 68 centimeters front to back, and 65 centimeters tall, and those dimensions were a big part of why I chose this tank. Including the cabinet, the whole system is 7 centimeters lower than my previous tank, which will make top-down viewing that little bit easier. And the extra 8 centimeters of front to back width will allow me to put a better scape in place with nice gentle angles and a little bit more negative space. And away from the tank itself, I also really like the sump extension that this tank comes with that acts as a standalone frag tank separated from the rest of the sump. But before I get into the really exciting stuff of the tank itself, I had to build the cabinet. The parts for the cabinet come in a separate box on top of the tank, which meant I could get that into the house first without having to lift the glass tank. The cabinet was pretty easy to put together, and I did it all on my own over the course of 2 evenings, which was really taking my time. A couple of the fixings weren't clearly marked on the instructions, but it was always pretty obvious which bits you should use, and the only thing I would say is that it's very easy to put some of the panels on upside down or back to front if you don't read the instructions carefully, which you will then notice 5 or 6 steps later when you spot that the holes that should be there are on the other side of the panel. Now I did that twice, so it's really worth double checking the instructions at each step of the way, although fortunately I didn't have to go back and undo several steps when that happened, and I managed to just unscrew and refit the individual panel on its own both times. My previous Red Sea cabinet was made of plywood, but the frame for this tank is all aluminium, and it feels really solid and high quality, as you'd expect from an expensive tank like this. The horizontal sections at the bottom and sides are single width at 20mm thick, and all of the vertical structural supports are double width. There's also a large piece of plywood in the centre of the stand that spans the full width of the cabinet, alongside an additional smaller piece of plywood at the front, which rests on the aluminium frame and so is also structural. And there are 2 further aluminium brace bars that will slot in place in front of the sump when I've put the glass in place, but you only do that after you've put the tank on top, then leveled the whole system by adjusting the feet. The side panels and doors are what Red Sea call marine spec plywood, which means they're very thick and heavy and have a glossy waterproof coating. And my 6-year-old Red Sea Peninsula showed no signs of water damage on any of the panels when I broke it down recently. The rear covers though are not wood and they're some kind of plastic, and the only thing I don't like about the cabinet is that there's no real ventilation. The only gaps are a small hole where the plumbing comes in and a couple of small holes in the dry section of the cabinet. It was a similar story on my last tank, and I found that the cabinet got quite sweaty at times and that keeping the temperature down in the summer was more difficult with no cabinet ventilation. So for this tank I've cut a small piece out of the panel using a Stanley knife, and I've installed these PC cooling fans I got from Amazon. They're the same fans I had on my last tank, and they do a really good job, especially helping keep the heat down in the summer, although annoyingly I managed to drop the fans on day 1 and snap one of the blades off. Now because the tank itself is so big and heavy, getting it in the house is going to be quite awkward, and I think it's likely going to have to come through a window rather than the front door, but I haven't finalised my plans for that yet, so I'll update you on how that goes in the next video. And while I'm waiting to set the tank itself up, I've started seeding my aquascape. I bought 2 man-made islands from RR Aquascapes, which is the company I've used for my last 3 or 4 scapes. This is the bottom half of one of the islands, and the rest is currently sitting in a large vat of salt water with a couple of mature pieces of rock from my previous 6-year-old tank. They've been in there for about 2 weeks so far, and will probably have been in there for a total of a month by the time I move them into the new tank. I don't have a heater in here, just a power head to oxygenate the water, and I'm not really feeding the bacteria regularly, although I have dropped a few bits of food in there on a couple of occasions. I'm not saying this is the best way of doing things, and really the idea is just to give the new tank a bit of a kickstart in terms of establishing a population of good bacteria. Now in terms of equipment, I won't be exclusively using Red Sea stuff, and I'll show you the other branded stuff I've gone for in a future video, but I have gone with the Red Sea lights, filter roller and dosing pump. For lighting, my favourite combination, and the one I use on my 2 other tanks, is a Kessel flanked by AI blades. And I went for the red sea lights because they have very similar shimmer to Kessel, and I can spend the money I've saved on corals instead. And I'll probably be adding 2 6-foot AI blade grows at some point in the near future. Before I do that though, I am going to see how the Reef leads get on their own, because they will look much more sleek on their own given I'll be using the Red Sea hanging pendant. Realistically though, I think it's highly likely that I'll add the AI blades, primarily for the increased light coverage and the beautiful blue fluorescence. As to the filter roller, the Reef mat was a no-brainer. I've had 4 different automatic filter rollers, and the Reef mat, along with the Reef factory equivalent, is in my opinion the best. The only thing not to like about the Reef mat is that it's quite big, but there's a dedicated space in the sump for it, so that's not an issue for me. And the last piece of Red Sea kit I have is their 4-head dosing pump. I bought a 2-head Red Sea dosing pump a few months ago for the tank that sits behind me in my videos, and I really like it. The app works very well, the unit itself feels really solid, the motors are quiet enough, and the mounting bracket is a really clever design. And finally on equipment, whilst I'm here, I'm going to tell you about how I'm going to light the cabinet. I'm using 6 meters of Philips Hue light strips connected to a motion sensor that turns the lights on when the cabinet doors open. The whole setup was quite expensive and cost me £200, but they're absolutely brilliant, so money well spent in my opinion. And finally then we come to the controversy, and it seems that you can't post a photo of a Red Sea Reefer tank online without someone telling you it's going to split. And to be fair, I have seen some photos and videos online of people who have had problems with older Red Sea tanks leaking. Now Red Sea hasn't asked me to talk about this or not to talk about this, and as far as I can see, the issues are mostly limited to a small number of older tanks, and on this tank in particular, Red Sea seem to have made a number of structural upgrades, including improvements to the cabinet and the tank, that should make it much stronger. But this is something only you can decide, and I'm not going to try to persuade you either way as to whether you should or shouldn't buy a Red Sea tank. If you're concerned, it's something you should do your own research on and make your own mind up on, and all I can say is that I had no issues with my old tank whatsoever, and I don't anticipate any issues with the new tank. The cabinet seems really solidly well put together and very strong, and there are a few areas on the glass tank itself that Red Sea have strengthened that I'll show you in a future video. Now I will of course be documenting this build series as I go along, so make sure you like and subscribe if you want to follow my journey, and if you've got any questions, let me know in the comment section below, and until next time, happy reefing.